If you didn't know before, you're gonna learn today. A well-organized lie defeats a disorganized truth every time. And your girl is coming through to do what I got to do. And I'm gonna do what I got to do. I'm standing tall. I'm standing strong. Hey, you know what it is. Pseudo Killas on deck. Peace everyone. My name is Chani Kinsler, also known as CK the Poet, and this is the Death to the Pseudo series, where we will be learning about various illogical thinking and errors in reasoning a lot of misinformed, ignorant, and scientifically illiterate individuals use, like faulty generalizations, logical fallacies, and also confirmation and cognitive biases. These videos are important to do because individuals are displaying a lot of faulty thinking that mislead and misinform a lot of people. And these people are a danger to the Black community and a detriment to the mind of the would-be future critical thinkers. Today, we're going to talk about confirmation bias. This isn't really a logical fallacy. It's more of an internal fallacy. And people use logical fallacies normally to maintain this cognitive bias. And actually, cognitive bias is going to be the next video in the Death to the Pseudo series. But for now, we're going to just talk about confirmation bias, what it means, why people do it, why it isn't okay, how to reduce confirmation bias within ourselves, exceptions to using confirmation biases, and how to combat people who have confirmation bias in conversation or debate. But before we dive deep, let's go over some quick terms. These are some terms that I thought we probably should go over real quick that I thought would probably be a little helpful to move us forward. We're going to start with belief. Belief is a psychological state in which individuals hold propositions or premises to be true, usually without evidence. Appeal to celebrity. Accepting a claim of a celebrity based on his or her celebrity status, not on the strength of the argument. Then there's appeal to common belief. The Latin form is argumentum ad populum. Y'all also know this as groupthink, appeal to masses, appeal to belief, bandwagoning fallacy, appeal to the mob, and this lovely concept called social conformance, aka peer pressure. This is a claim that most and or many people in general of a particular group accept the belief as true is presented as evidence for the claim. Basically, we need to keep in mind that accepting another person's belief or many people's belief without demanding evidence as to why that person accepts the belief is lazy thinking and a dangerous way to accept information. Then there's attitude polarization. A lot of people just pretty much just call it belief polarization or just the polarization effect. This is when a disagreement becomes more extreme as different parties consider evidence over the issue. Next, there is belief perseverance. This is basically when beliefs persist after the evidence for it is shown to be false. Illusionary correlation. This is when perceiving a relationship between variables, typically people, events, or behaviors, even when no such relationship exists. False association may be formed because rare or novel occurrences are more noticeable, and therefore they tend to capture one's attention. This phenomena is one way stereotypes form and endure. Just remember that whole constant conjunction definition that David Hume came up with. That comes to mind. Then there's irrational primacy effect. Greater reliance on information encountered early in the series of a conversation or conversations cause a false correlation. So, what is confirmation bias? This is a tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and or recall information in a way that conforms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. People display this bias when they select information that supports their views, ignoring contrary information, or when they interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting their existing attitudes. The effect is strongest for desired outcomes for emotionally charged issues and for deeply entrenched beliefs. Keep in mind, y'all, that confirmation biases cannot be eliminated entirely, but it can be managed, for example, with education and or training in critical thinking skills. Before we move forward, there are some examples of confirmation bias that I think we all should be aware of, and these are the main four that you're going to encounter whenever someone displays extreme confirmation bias. They will have bias search for information. Basically, you'll have people that search for information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs and avoids information that contradicts it. Then there's bias favoring of information. This is when people give more weight to information that supports their beliefs and less weight to information that contradicts them. Next, there's bias interpretation of information. People interpret information in a way that confirms their beliefs, even if the information could be interpreted in a way that contradicts them. Finally, there is bias recall of information. People will remember information that supports their beliefs and forget information that contradicts them, or remembers supporting information as having been more supporting than it really was, or they will incorrectly remember contradictory information as having supporting their beliefs this entire time. I wanted to go over some common actions that individuals exhibit that showcase their denial. This is a good chart that I found that breaks down pretty much all the things someone that has a confirmation bias will do, especially people that push misinformation or that are believers in pseudoscience or pseudo-history. And one of the first things that they'll do is that they will always have a fake expert. If they are, as Unc says, a pseudo-sophisticate, they will have a gang of fake experts. These individuals will create a fake debate by inventing controversy where there is none, and will magnify the minority, that unrepresentative sample or data within their information. See the Appealing to Authority video in the Pseudo Killer playlist for more on that. Someone that exhibits confirmation bias will definitely abuse logical fallacies. After you continually correct their misinformation, they may use ad hominem attacks against you. They will misrepresent your statements and claims by strawmanning you to death, so you'll be easier to attack. Ambiguity will always be present, so folks will stay uncertain and vague. They will oversimplify your statements and claims and arguments by providing a false choice or a gang of scenarios that have a single cause, and this is common among reductionists. They will present false analogies that don't relate, usually by doing what is called false equivocation. This will lead to red herrings or distractions, which really everything on this chart is nothing but, a big distraction. Or they will blow things out of proportion and hyper-focus on one small thing that distracts from the bigger picture. Also, they'll go to the hypotheticals, like slippery slopes, mentioning one step and claiming it will lead to a chain of events that are not likely to happen. When someone is in denial and exhibiting extreme confirmation bias, they will present impossible expectations, and when their argument or claim is defeated, they will move the goalpost to a new claim or even new topic. In order to maintain their bias, they will have to cherry pick their information. A lot of times, folks get to giving anecdotes, testimonies, and throwing out evidence. They would also do what is called slothful induction. This happens when someone denies giving a proper conclusion despite the overwhelming evidence. And who could forget quote mining? This is when questionable individuals will misquote or quote people completely out of context to make themselves right. Finally, there's conspiracy theorists. It's almost guaranteed that if someone displays some type of confirmation bias, spreads misinformation, and or has heavily been convinced and influenced by false information, they will believe or present a conspiracy theory at some point. It's always going to be contradictory. There always has to be a nefarious intent. Something always has to be wrong. There's always a persecuted victim or victims. And whatever they say is always immune to having any evidence. And if they do bring evidence, it's always reinterpreted and random as hell with a biased perspective. So, why do people do this? Confirmation bias occurs due to flaws in the way people test hypotheses. While ignoring alternatives, they engage only with information that supports their pre-existing beliefs, decisions, and entertaining information that doesn't contradict, aka selective exposure. Sometimes it is unconscious and unintentional. Other times, it is intentional with them trying to be deceitful. This will lead to people being less open-minded, unreasonable, and they will ignore useful information. Another reason is their need to be right, to preserve or build their own self-esteem, valuing highly their own beliefs to feel good when they think that they're right about something. If they find their beliefs challenged, they feel threatened and become defensive. Another reason why people probably do this as well is a couple of concepts I definitely wanted to go over. One of them is challenge avoidance. This is basically, avoiding that you're wrong. They do this to help them avoid cognitive dissonance, to minimize the psychological distress by ignoring information that contradicts their beliefs, since encountering or accepting that information would increase the dissonance that they experience. Another thing that people will do is reinforcement seeking, or the desire to find out that you're right. This behavior reduces that cognitive dissonance as well, by prompting people to find support for their existing beliefs, which can help them cope with dissonance. That occurs as a result of encountering contradictory information. And finally, our brains, they sometimes suppress that neurological activity in the area associated with emotional regulation and emotionally neural reasoning. This causes people to process information based on how their emotions guide them rather than based on how their logic would guide them. So why is this not okay? For one, it can be dangerous, because errors will be made and people can get hurt. You will become closed-minded and conform to peer pressure and denial. It can encourage discrimination and false information. People will take a subjective approach to evidence and truth instead of just accepting it for what it is. It allows the spread of lies, propaganda, and dogma as fact. You will exaggerate and become overconfident instead of honest. It leads to poor academic performance and a lack of progress in society. And of course, who could forget that it enforces this unrealistic view of the world and events, only remembering the biased perspectives. So what about exceptions? I will be honest, this is a first for the Death to the Pseudo series. And shockingly, there is no exceptions. There's never an exception to having a confirmation bias in any situation. So instead of having a blank slide, I thought I'd go over the different areas in which you would most likely encounter confirmation bias. So I'm going to start with religions. In order for them to maintain their beliefs and obedience, they have to have some level of confirmation bias. Then there are people that are racist or prejudiced or discriminate against people for pick a reason. They always have to have some form of confirmation bias. Then there are pseudoscience. In order for people that are pseudoscientists to push their false information, they have to ignore science, displaying their bias. You'll also see confirmation bias in the workplace in regards to hiring practices and performance evaluations, and sometimes even in workplace culture. In sports, it's definitely extreme. When people give their reasons as to why one sport or team is better than another, it can definitely get out of control. This also happens in politics and voting. And of course, this also happens with conspiracy theories. In regards to social media, this is a hub for reinforcing confirmation biases and rewarding people to stay in bubbles and echo chambers. And finally, when it comes to drugs, people will make excuses as to why one drug is okay compared to another. They may have a bias on how much they really use, or if they actually have an addiction or a problem. So, how do we reduce or avoid confirmation bias, whether it's in ourselves or encouraging others to reduce their bias? First, we need to identify when and how we're likely to experience the bias. Explain what the confirmation bias is, why you're experiencing it, and how it could affect you and why it could be a problem. And, try to use some relevant examples, be understanding about the situation. Make it so that the goal is to find the right answer rather than defending an existing belief, especially when you become defensive. Minimize the unpleasantness and the issues associated with finding out you're wrong. Emphasize the values of learning new things and avoid mocking people and yourself for having held incorrect beliefs. Encourage yourself and others to avoid letting emotions dictate your responses and actions. Encourage people to give information sufficient consideration, including yourself. Sometimes you may have to step away from a conversation so you can do more research on the topic. Sometimes you may encounter some people that it may not be a good idea to give them the correct information out in the open. You might want to send it to them privately. Encourage people to avoid forming a hypothesis too early. Replace the word certain in your life with extremely probable. Ask people to explain their reasoning. This could help people identify potential issues in their reasoning, such as if their stance is unsupported. Ask people and yourself to think about various reasons as to why this preferred hypothesis might be wrong. It can make you more likely to accept and internalize challenging information. So, the favorite part of the video. Yo, CK the Poet, how do we combat people that are displaying extreme confirmation bias? You're gonna see me repeat a lot of the same things that I said in the previous slide. This one is more directed towards the person that you're speaking to that are displaying extreme confirmation bias. Like I said in the previous slide, you want to make them aware of the existence of their bias. Help them understand how having this bias can negatively impact them and those around them. Convince them to take an objective approach and set aside their ego, their personal preferences, their perceptions for the sake of the truth. Persuade them not to let their emotions dictate how they process information, particularly when it comes to things that they may be passionate about, have strong convictions or beliefs. Try to coax them to make the goal be to transition from being right to finding the right answer. Let them know it's okay. They shouldn't avoid feeling bad if they find out that they're wrong. Try to get them to focus on the importance of learning something new that they can use in the future. Motivate them to analyze sufficient amount of information to come to a conclusion. Entice them to come up with alternative hypotheses, as well as reasons as to why those hypotheses might be right. Have them identify their stance and evidence that they are basing it on. Basically, they need to source up or shut up. And to the left here, you'll see there's a nice little poster that I found online that, I thought was pretty cool, that went into even more detail on ways to combat confirmation bias. And this can be used not just for yourself, but also for others. All right, everybody, we're going to be wrapping this up here soon. So I thought there were a couple of tactics that you need to be aware of and other psychological issues in regards to confirmation bias that I thought would be important to just go over just so you're aware of them. And one of them is snow job. Snow job is basically when you're proving a claim by overwhelming an audience with mountains of irrelevant evidence, numbers, documents, graphs, and statistics that, the audience most likely might not be able to interpret or understand. It's similar to Gish Gallop. And if y'all remember, I went over Gish Gallop in the Burden of Proof video. Check that out in the YouTube playlist for the Pseudo Killer. So the difference between snow job and Gish Gallop is a snow job, usually people are providing a lot of irrelevant facts, a lot of, documents, statistics, and information that the audience may not necessarily understand or be able to comprehend because of their knowledge on the subject. But a lot of times the information is factual though. But with Gish Gallop, usually people are providing a lot of incorrect and false information, statements, and claims. And they're doing that intentionally. So it throws you off and you end up addressing those claims instead of the original topic that you're talking about. So moving on to the preacher's we. The preacher's we is accusation statements. Like when people say we or us when they really mean you. You'll see this a lot when people, are saying, hey, we all do this. Or hey, all of us, we all do the same thing. When really, all of us don't do the same thing. Really, you're just talking about yourself. You're trying to strengthen your argument and make everyone relate to you when really it's about you. Then there's the invincible ignorance fallacy. This is basically just a refusal to argue, not accepting any evidence. And you'll definitely see this a lot with people that have an extreme confirmation bias. With the double bind, this is setting up a situation in which no matter what the person does or answers, they are wrong. Even when you right, you wrong. Next is ad hoc rescue. I know a lot of people are familiar with the ad hoc post-rationalization, but ad hoc rescue is also known as the making shit up fallacy. And you'll see this happen a lot. When people are desperately trying to be right and they hold on to certain beliefs despite any evidence presented to the contrary. As a result, they begin to make up excuses as to why their beliefs could still be true and still will always be true, despite the fact they have no real evidence for what they're making up. Next is hindsight bias. This is basically someone that's overconfident because they think that they have predicted past events, that they're inclined to think that they can see future events coming. So they get to betting too much on the outcome for future events being much higher. And oftentimes they do this with poor decisions based on faulty level of confidence. Next is the illusionary truth effect. This is the idea that if someone repeats something often enough, people will slowly start to believe it's true. This is done a lot in bandwagoning and with propaganda. And just to give y'all an example, the United States media does a lot of propaganda very heavily. So they'll just keep repeating the same thing over and over again until it's true. Oh, we need to go to war with Iraq. We need to go to war with Iraq. So you repeat it enough, the population will eventually agree with it just because you keep saying that it's true. All right, before we wrap it up, I thought it would be important to go over some psychological issues related to confirmation bias. There's guaranteed that you are going to see one or a combination of all of these take place. So the first one is the backfire effect. This is when you are presented with an opposing opinion. You double down and strongly commit to your position. Another one is the halo effect. When you allow one trait of something, whether it's a person, a brand, an action, or whatever, to overshadow a more nuanced impression of the entity in a positive manner. For example, if you perceive someone as generous, you may automatically assume that they are a caring person. Or, in the more extreme sense, a slave master is a hero because he freed his slaves. Another one is group attribution bias. This is when you assume a member of a cultural group has stereotypical qualities of that group. The qualities include general preferences and biased views. For example, you might incorrectly assume that someone who belongs to a specific political party voted for that party's presidential candidate. Well, everybody, here are my sources. I hope everybody like and share the video. I hope everyone has a better understanding about what confirmation bias is, why people do it, why it isn't okay, exceptions to having a confirmation bias. And we pretty much find out that there never is a reason to hold a confirmation bias, how to reduce confirmation bias within ourselves, and how to deal with people that display extreme confirmation bias. I, just like all of you, have exhibited confirmation biases in the past and will also have to work very hard in the future to prevent them as well. For other videos like this one from the Death to the Pseudo series, and for the new series that I started, the Pseudo Slayer Lessons, check the Pseudo Killer playlist in the YouTube channel. Brother Unc West was nice enough to set that up for me. Love you, Brother Unc. Make sure y'all join the Pseudo Killer Discord server today for free sources and books. And y'all know what it is around here. Death to the Pseudos.